Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to the little poem Mannahatta, poem number 6 of the 22 of From Noon to Starry Night. Think about it. In the previous poem we're at Magnet South, and now we're moving to the north. In other words, these polarities, as we were talking earlier about, this idea that From Noon to Starry Night tries to show how Whitman reconciles or attempts to reconcile any number of paradoxes. Now this is what, among all the other things I've said about Whitman, this is what I love about him, and I think this is why we have to read him today more than ever. Whitman is acutely aware that America is defined by its paradoxes, right? I mean, it's ubiquitous. You can't get away from it. The man who wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, owned slaves until the day he died." What? How is that possible? Whitman would say, no, this is America. And if you don't understand that, then you really don't understand America. Let me demonstrate it by especially, Whitman says, let me demonstrate it by especially celebrating what is foundational to America, its cities, especially his favorite city, New York. He used the Aboriginal name Mannahatta. We'll get into it in a moment. Now, for me, this is fundamental to how you have to read Whitman. And so as we approach this poem, and there will be one other poem in Stanza 70, the very first poem in the first annex is, in fact, likewise named Mannahatta, you can tell how much Whitman loves what he calls my city. Now, the assumptions here that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, and that you've been with us from the very beginning, that invitational word come, and you're going to get a sense of how Whitman is inviting you to the great city of his day, and of course, let's say it out loud, it's still the greatest city in the world, isn't it? And so, he's inviting us in some ways to take a look again at what makes that city so amazing. Now, we've given a set of introductory comments to Starry Night. I'm hopeful that you have already watched that, and of course, as we said, we already finished with Magnet South. Now, our Nortons will tell us that there's a couple of things that makes this poem fascinating to study, especially deleted lines. Several times we've commented on the fact that Whitman deletes lines. This will be significant in our study here. Nortons. This poem first appeared with the present title in Leaves of Grass 1860, reprinted in the Leaves of Grass 1867, incorporated in a Leaves of Grass group in Leaves of Grass 1871, and in the present cluster in Leaves of Grass 1881, with the 3 concluding lines after line 17 that are substituted for an excluded 7-line conclusion, which is worth the attention of the student. Watch this. Quote, this is again the original poem. "The parades, processions, bugles playing, flags flying, drums beating, a million people, manners free and superb, open voices, hospitality, the most courageous and friendly young men. The free city, no slaves, no owners of slaves. The beautiful city, the city of hurried and sparkling waters, the city of spires and masts, the city nested in bays, my city. The city of such women, I'm mad to be with them. I will return after death to be with them. The city of such young men, I swear I cannot live happy without. I often go, talk, walk, eat, drink, sleep with them." Now to finish, Norton's will tell us that Mannahatta is unquestionably Walt Whitman's city, and he is, no question, its bard. The Aboriginal name that will be mentioned here will take us back to a number of different places and times when, in fact, this name is used. We'll want to remind ourselves that Whitman is fascinated with this Aboriginal name of Mannahatta. There is some talk that he was told early on that Mannahatta meant maybe a place to buy bows and arrows, a native reference, but Whitman believed this was probably somewhat improbable. In his notes, he says that maybe Mannahatta is a point of land surrounded by rushing, tempestuous, demonic waters. Of course, he'll use this in Me in Perturb. And we're also told that his brother, Thomas Jefferson Whitman, Jeff, and Jeff's wife, Martha, named their firstborn daughter Mannahatta. And Dave Reynolds, the great biographer, will conclude that Hattie was poetically named. It's clear that Whitman is just, dare we say it, almost mesmerized by his city in this poem. Now, if Magnet South had all kinds of grandiose language. We're going to get some of the same here. Just to remind, 16 times Mannahatta gets used in Leaves of Grass. And you'll remember it, as we said, from the imperturbed, from starting from Paumanok 1, where he calls it my city. Of course, it was charged, and then probably most significantly Brooklyn Ferry. There are many who say that to read this poem, you really have to have studied Brooklyn Ferry close, which thankfully we've done. He begins with a phrase that only gets used one time in Leaves of Grass. I was asking for something specific and perfect for my city. I love his use again of the word perfect. It takes us back, of course, to those final lines just a couple of poems away, right? When we were playing around with Mystic Trumpeter in passage number 8. You remember that? We were talking about the perfection that is idealized there of the perfect nation. Here, it's the perfect city. Whereupon, lo, again, this arcane language. By the way, the exclamation point is significant. We're going to have 5 of them, and the other 4 will come at the end of the poem. So it'll begin with an exclamation point, and it'll end with 4. Lo, up sprang the aboriginal names we've commented on. Now, he loves that use of that word. I see what there is in a name, a word. Think about the power of logos. Liquid, sane, unruly, musical, self-sufficient. He loves to stack these. Here it's 5, right? I see the word of my city is that word from of old. In other words, I think that what Whitman's trying to do here is to connect New York or Mannahatta with Rome, with Athens, with the other great cities, Alexandria, with the other great cities of the past. Because I see that word nested in nest. Now, I told you guys, one of the central motifs is hugging, clasping, grabbing. Here it's nesting. Think about the power of the use nesting as it relates to a collection of poems called Leaves of Grass. I find it fascinating. Nesting in nests of water bays. Superb, so we go from perfect to superb. Rich, hymned, think about hymned as it relates to nesting. Thick all round with sail ships and steamships. He's going to celebrate technology. An island 16 miles long. He loves to be specific. Solid, founded. Again, this idea of strong and solidness. Numberless crowded streets. We're back to the whole idea of measureless. High growths of, again, evolution, right? High growths of iron, slender, strong. Obviously, the skyline is already starting to happen in Whitman's day. Light, splendidly uprising toward clear skies. Can you hear all those S sounds? Read it again with me. Numberless crowded streets, high crowds of iron, slender, strong, light, splendidly uprising toward clear skies. You hear all those intentional S sounds? Tides, swift and ample, well loved by me toward sundown. Think about crossing Brooklyn Ferry here now. And obviously noon to starry night. The flowing sea currents, the little islands, larger adjoining islands, the heights, the villas. In other words, he's moving all over the city. The countless masks, before it was numberless, now it's countless. The white shore steamers, the lighters, the ferry boats. Again, we're emphasizing technology. The black sea steamers, well modeled. In other words, technology is so beautifully shown in the city of New York, Mannahatta. The downtown streets, the jobbers' houses of business. Again, jobbers gets used one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. Jobbers' houses of business. Now we're going to get to the money. The houses of business of the ship merchants and money brokers. In other words, here's our celebration of Wall Street. The river streets. Then he goes to immigrants arriving. Of course, the great city of immigrants, starting from Paumanok 18, will be the first time he uses this word. Do you remember in the poem On the Prairies, at Night on the Prairies, that he uses the word immigrants, but notice the spelling is different there. Immigrants arriving, 15 or 20,000 in a week. It's a fascinating study how America is built through the immigrants. It's unbelievable. I think it's forgotten today, and we got to go back and look at it. Whitman is going to take us there. The number of people who arrive, who are then going to change forever the landscape, and he's going to celebrate it. Okay, here in a little bit, he's going to talk about hospitality, which will make us think about these immigrants, and whether in fact it was true that in New York and Mannahatta always open, armed, welcomed immigrants. We know otherwise, don't we? The carts hauling goods. The manly race of drivers, we've seen this, his love of the driver, right, of horses. The brown-faced sailors, we've seen that as well, of course, brown-faced in drum taps as well. The summer air, the bright sun, think about noon to starry night, the bright sun shining and the sailing clouds aloft, the winter snows, so we go, again, opposites from summer to winter. The sleigh bells, the broken ice in the river, passing along up or down with the flood tide or ebb tide. And then he goes to the mechanics, right? Obviously taking us back to Hear America Singing. The mechanics of the city, the masters, well-formed, beautiful-faced, looking you straight in the eyes. Now, many have argued that Whitman understood New York before anybody else really understood it. What is it that makes New Yorkers so different? Here, it's that look straight in the eyes. In other words, very direct, very clear about what they think, very opinionated, some have said, of those of us who have spent time living or visiting New York City. Notice trottoirs, you'll remember this from Give Me the Splendid Silent Sun, it's just the French word for sidewalks. Trottoirs thronged, vehicles, Broadway, obviously the arts are going to be significant, the women, the shops and shows, 1 million people. I told you guys, he loves his large, grandiose numbers. 1 million people. Notice all the dashes they used here. Make us think of Emily Dickinson, right? Manners, free and superb. This idea of freedom takes us back to the deleted lines of no slaves, no slave owners, no owners of slaves. Open voices. In other words, freedom to say whatever you want to say. And then he says it, hospitality, which takes us to our idea of xenia from our study of Homer's The Iliad and Odyssey. That idea that you should always take care of the outsider. Obviously, immigrants are being somewhat represented here as being shown proper hospitality. The most courageous and friendly young men. The idea of New York being a friendly city. It's an interesting idea, because many people who visit New York say, well, it's the opposite. Well, it all depends on how you define friendship, right? In other words, I'm going to tell you what I really think. If you don't like that, dude, I'm going to call that friendship. Whatever you want to call it is your business. City of hurried and sparkling waters. Do you notice this with Whitman? He always comes back to something related to nature. You would have thought maybe he would say hurried and sparkling faces. But no, he comes back to the waters again. City of spires and masts. Now we're to our technology. Notice all your exclamation points here. City nested. Notice, so it's this hugging mentality, right? It's this idea of being embedded, okay? City nested in bays. And then, of course, to finish, my city, the way he began. Well, what are we going to say about this poem in terms of major messages at 2A? Well, I think his argument is that America is great because of its cities. And the greatest city of them all, New York, Mannahatta, is the one that best represents America. Why? Because it's paradoxical. It has everything included in it, and that's what makes it great. At 2B, I love the word choice, hemmed, nested, leaves of grass, the title of this collection. In other words, somehow protected. At 3A, well, we can think about great poems about cities. Wordsworth's London 1802 comes to mind. We've given lectures on it, and his calling for Milton to come back and help save a city that is caught in the swamps, the swampy waters. Or how about, of course, the most famous maybe poem of a city, Carl Sandburg's Chicago, the 1914 Offering. We've given full lectures on both these poems at learnstrong.net. Finally, at 3B, how are you going to own a poem like this? Well, what is your favorite city? And to what degree do you think you're defined by cities, even if you don't live in a city? And to what degree is Whitman helping you to appreciate the paradoxes of place in America? Thank you.